New York, November 1944. Close your eyes and feel the silence. It is an afternoon dyed gold by the cold sunlight of the Atlantic wind blowing through every street. In a cramped office on the 86th floor of the Empire State Building, the ticking of a Waltham wristwatch sounds in dry, rhythmic beats. Tick. Tock. An office worker inhales a Lucky Strike cigarette, believing the fiery front is on the other side of the ocean, thousands of miles away from where he sits. Perfect peace. But history is always rewritten in the moments when people feel safest. What if I told you that, at that very moment, 100 miles above the Empire State Building in the pitch-black sky of the stratosphere, a machine of destruction was hurtling toward us at 20 times the speed of sound? Not a single engine sound. Not a single warning. Only death falling from the stars. Are you looking into the silence of infinite space, or staring straight down the barrel of the apocalypse? We have always believed that, in World War II, threats from the sky took the form of noisy bomber fleets that could easily be detected by radar. All Allied eyes were fixed on the muddy airfields of Europe. However, deep within the dust-covered underground vaults of Allied intelligence archives, a yellowed file codenamed Project America painted a completely different nightmare. Declassified intelligence reports from the OSS repeatedly mentioned an unidentified flying object, a weapon shaped like a silver spear. In the closed-door meetings of the Pentagon, a silent panic spread. This machine was designed to be immune to every radar network of that time. Not a single flying fortress or American air defense system could reach its flight ceiling of hundreds of kilometers. Everyone, including the top generals in Washington, initially laughed at this hypothesis. They believed a Third Reich on the verge of collapse, exhausted of every barrel of oil on the Eastern Front, could not possibly build a spacecraft. They thought it was just a pathetic hoax by the Nazi propaganda machine. But they were wrong. The truth lay hidden in calculated technical drawings. When Allied aviation experts found the first drafts of what was called Silbervogel, beads of sweat broke out on their foreheads. They realized this object did not fly straight. It applied a science fiction principle, skipping on the atmosphere. It would bounce on the ionosphere like a flat stone skipped across a lake. Each skip carried it across thousands of kilometers of ocean in the blink of an eye. Nazi Germany did not intend to use conventional navy or air forces to attack America. They wanted to use a bomb dropped from the fourth layer of the sky. And by the time the sirens on the ground could wail, Manhattan would be nothing but a giant pit of slag. The scythe of the Grim Reaper was hanging over the head of the Statue of Liberty. Fortunately for humanity, the ticking of the clock at the Empire State Building continued its rhythm. The flight named Silbervogel never reached its final bombing coordinates. But the decaying papers in the Noir Archive leave us with a chilling truth: technology of destruction never dies, it only sleeps, waiting for someone brave enough, or crazy enough, to wake it. The most bone-chilling mystery does not lie in the 3-kilometer steel tracks or rocket engines. The greatest mystery is, what kind of brain could dream such a bloody dream among the stars? To find the answer, we must push open the door and step into a lab reeking of chemicals, where a cursed genius is holding a pen, redrawing the sky. Look at the hands of Eugen Sänger. Those are not the hands of a cold-blooded killer, but the hands of an artist obsessed with perfection. Long, thin fingers, tips stained yellow by nicotine, are trembling slightly as they move a ruler over a flat sheet of vellum. In this room, the smell of cheap cigarette smoke blends tightly with the pungent scent of vellum and dry India ink. It is a signature scent of exhaustion, the smell of sleepless nights spent chasing a technical ghost. The sound of the pencil lead screeching on the paper is sharp and dry, like fingernails scratching the lid of a steel coffin. Every curve Sänger draws for the Silbervogel hull is not just an aerodynamic calculation, it is a stroke toward the void. He does not look at the peeling walls of the research institute, his eyes are looking through the roof, through the gloomy clouds of 1930s Germany, to reach the absolute silence of orbital space. Beside him, Irene Bread, his associate and later his wife, quietly places a cup of stone-cold coffee on the table. She says nothing, only using her sharp eyes to double-check the endless rows of integral calculus. These numbers are the only barrier between reality and illusion. They did not work for Hitler's ideals, or at least they lied to themselves that way. They worked for the deadly seduction of science. But the shadow of the silver bird is stretching long across the ground, and that shadow takes the shape of a deathly scythe. In the archives of the Reich Air Ministry, there is a file with a secret code that very few are allowed to access. It is not a design for a conventional fighter plane, but a document over 100 pages long titled, Long-Range Rocketry. Why did a project considered unrealistic and insane receive special attention from the Nazi elite? The answer lies in the archive records of the closed-door meetings of Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler. The Nazi leadership did not care about Sänger's dream of space exploration. What they craved was a Wunderwaffe, wonder weapon, capable of dealing a fatal blow to the heart of America, something no Luftwaffe squadron could do. Declassified documents show that the budget poured into this project at the time was a terrifying mystery. While the army needed every scrap of aluminum to build defensive fighters, tons of resources and thousands of hours of labor from top engineers were burned on Sänger's sci-fi dreams. The RLM saw in the Silver Bird an undeniable potential, a vehicle that could carry a 4-ton payload of explosives, rise to an altitude of 280 kilometers, and pour destruction down on Manhattan without any supplies or intermediate bases. According to Noir Archive records, Hitler was mesmerized by the idea of a weapon that could look down on the enemy from heaven. The arrogance of an empire wanting to dominate both the earth and the sky turned a dreamer's draft into a death sentence hanging over humanity. But among the archive pages praising the project's feasibility, modern historians found a small note in the margin from a low-ranking technical officer. That note read, "Sänger's calculation on heat dissipation is an illusion. If they continue, this ship will not skip on the atmosphere, it will turn into a flying crematorium." Was the Nazi elite deceived by their own ambition? Or did Sänger intentionally hide a fatal error to protect his space dream from the blood-stained hands of war? The answer lies hidden behind the massive blocks of steel gradually taking shape in secret. Stop here, right at the edge of the cold, hard steel track. Do you hear it? It is not the wind. It is the hiss of liquid oxygen being compressed tightly into stainless steel containers. A high-pitched, piercing sound, like the scream of a trapped creature trying to escape. Suddenly, the darkness is torn apart by a beam of eerie blue light, the ghostly blue of a highly potent liquid fuel mixture leaking slightly from a nozzle. That light does not bring warmth, it brings the feeling of a calculated destruction. Then, the ground begins to tremble. Initially, just a small vibration under the soles of the feet, but only seconds later, the entire Harz mountain range feels like it is on the back of a waking monster. Boom. 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 The Silbervogel ship, placed on a giant rocket sled, begins to move. The sound of metal clashing against the 3-kilometer steel track echoes like continuous thunder. Hundreds of tons of thrust press down on the ground, making the surrounding air thick and searing hot. In the narrow cockpit, the test pilot feels his ribs cracking under the pressure of extreme acceleration. The smell of burnt kerosene blends with the scent of ozone after each electric spark shoots out from the track. This is not a plain test, this is a sacrificial ceremony, where humanity offers blood and steel in exchange for a ticket to the void. Looking at the numbers in the declassified files codenamed Top Secret, Junkers/Sänger, we see the madness of this project's scale. To realize the dream of bombing New York, German engineers did not just design a spacecraft, they were building a logistics system far beyond the capability of any nation at that time. According to the records of the Reich Ministry of Armaments and Ammunition, the 3 kilometers launch track alone consumed over 15,000 tons of specialized steel. While Tiger tanks on the Eastern Front were lacking every scrap of track link, here, steel was poured down just to serve a launch lasting less than 11 seconds. Compare it to its more famous brother, the V-2 rocket. The V-2 rocket, a ballistic missile that goes up and falls down in a parabola, speed about 5,700 kilometers per hour. The Silbervogel, it does not just go up. It intended to reach a speed of 22,000 kilometers per hour, nearly 4 times the V-2. The bomb payload it carried was 4,000 kilograms, 4 times the destructive power of a standard V-2 warhead. But the price paid was not just in steel. Field reports from 1943 reveal a devastating truth about fuel. To perform a single flight to America, the Silbervogel needed an amount of liquid oxygen and kerosene equivalent to the needs of an entire armored corps for a month. Declassified document 442G recorded, every time Sänger's engine fires in a static test, it consumes resources faster than the Allies can bomb our chemical plants. Every failed test, and there were dozens, was a scar left on Germany's war economy. The metal fragments flying in the test bunker were not just scrap metal, they were the broken bone fragments of a dying empire, trying to use engineering to reverse fate. People believe the project stopped due to a lack of materials. But when digging through the files of scientists arrested after Operation Paperclip, another truth emerges. In an internal report to Himmler, engineers secretly admitted, the liquid fuel pumping system for the Silbervogel frequently exploded due to immense pressure that materials of that time could not withstand. They had spent thousands of tons of Germany's most precious resources only to realize, they were trying to build an engine of the gods with Iron Age techniques. The silver bird was like an eagle with its feet chained to a pile of rusted steel, and every time it tried to flap its wings, it only destroyed its own cage. The mystery remains, if they could not control the power of liquid fuel, why did Hitler continue to sign blank checks for Sänger until the very last minute? Were they waiting for another kind of energy, something that the Ahnenerbe files are still keeping secret? Look at that gaze. It is not the gaze of a military strategist calculating coordinates, but the gaze of a traumatized child wanting to smash a toy he could never possess. Hitler stands there, his shadow stretching long over models of skyscrapers made of pure white plaster. His index finger, slightly trembling, moves slowly along the spire of the Chrysler building, then stops on the roof of the Empire State. He feels the roughness of the plaster under his cold skin. In the mind of the dictator, these tiny models are not homes for millions of people, they are symbols of the arrogance of a civilization he hates. He sees Manhattan not as a city, but as a forest of stone pillars that must be leveled. The scent in the bunker is suffocating, the smell of candle wax, dust from old maps, and a hint of mint from the stimulant pill he just swallowed. Hitler murmurs, a hoarse sound almost impossible to hear, destruction, everything must crumble at my feet. He imagines the Silbervogel appearing like a silver blade cutting across the New York sky, followed by a colossal pillar of fire swallowing the symbols of American power. To him, Manhattan is the modern Babylon, and he considers himself the god sent to deliver the final wrath. To understand why Hitler was so obsessed with the Silbervogel, we must turn to the criminal psychological analysis of the Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor of the CIA. In the file code named the Hitler Mind, psychologists pointed to a terrifying truth: Hitler suffered from megalomania combined with a deep architectural inferiority complex. He was essentially a failed artist, rejected by the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. That resentment transformed into an extreme veneration for massive architectural structures. Albert Speer, the Reich's chief architect, revealed in post-war interrogations that Hitler could spend hours gazing at urban models he intended to build on the world's ashes. According to archives, the Silbervogel project was not merely a military solution. In a 1943 report sent to Washington, an undercover OSS agent wrote, "Hitler does not want to win the war by occupying New York. He wants to win by erasing it from the map." He views the destruction of American skyscrapers as a ritualistic act, a way to prove that Nazi architecture is the only thing left standing. Modern historians analyzing technical drafts have discovered a strange detail: Hitler ordered the propaganda department to prepare films of New York burning, even though the ship's frame was not yet finished. This shows that Silbervogel was a weapon of psychological warfare before it was a physical one. He believed the image of Manhattan collapsing would break the will of the American people, forcing them to kneel and surrender before the first German soldier ever set foot on American soil. The dictator's obsession with concrete and steel was not just a personal hobby, it was the primary driver that kept this unrealistic project alive at all costs. The silver bird was the wings of hatred, fueled by a heart that never knew creation, only grand destruction. But there was one document Hitler never read, the secret report from his own military intelligence officers. They warned that bombing New York could backfire, turning fear into an uncontrollable American rage. Hitler ignored it. He only cared about one thing, seeing his finger crush the Empire State Building model on the sand table and waiting for the day it became reality. He did not know that, while he moved his hand over the plaster, scientists across the ocean were preparing a light even more horrific than anything he could imagine. Imagine you are standing inside the model of the Silbervogel. The air is no longer oxygen to breathe, it is a thick mass of heat, reeking of molten metal. Do you hear it? That is the sound of twisting. The cracking and groaning of the alloy hull as it begins to expand beyond its limits. It sounds like the moaning of a monster being burned alive from within. The outside temperature is rising, 500 degrees, 1000 degrees, then 2000 degrees Celsius. The originally shimmering silver hull now turns glowing red, then white hot like a light bulb filament about to burn out. In the control room, a sudden silence descends, a silence more terrifying than any explosion. The temperature gauge needle hits the red zone, vibrates violently, and snaps. Irene Bread's eyes are glued to the calculation sheets. Her lips tremble, her rapid breath fogging the clock's glass. She realizes a horrible truth: numbers do not lie, but they can betray. In that moment, the arrogance of geniuses collapses. They realize the silver bird is not an arrow through the sky, but a mobile crematorium. The theoretical calculations that shimmered on vellum had forgotten the scorching breath of reality. The faster the ship flies, the more the atmosphere becomes an impenetrable wall of fire. After the war, when top American aviation experts at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base reviewed Eugen Sänger's files, they discovered a fatal mathematical error that the Nazi scientific community had accidentally or intentionally ignored. According to declassified U.S. Air Force documents, Sänger used aerodynamic models that were too simple for hypersonic speeds. He believed that at those altitudes, the air was too thin to generate significant heat. But physical reality is much more brutal. When an object moves at Mach 20 into the thin layers of the atmosphere, it creates a phenomenon called peak thermal shock. Data from actual reports show, Sänger's calculation, the hull temperature would reach a maximum of about 1,000 degrees C. A level alloys of that time could withstand briefly. Physical reality, the temperature would exceed 3,500 degrees Celsius during the very first skip on the atmosphere. To help you visualize, steel melts at about 1,500 degrees Celsius. At 3,500 degrees Celsius, the Silbervogel would not glide like a stone on a lake. It would evaporate. It would turn into a cloud of molten metal streaking across the Atlantic sky before even seeing the New York horizon. U.S. File Technical Evaluation 102 concluded coldly, Sänger's project is a masterpiece of imagination, but a disaster of heat dissipation. If Hitler had attempted to launch the ship, he would simply have been sending the most expensive pile of scrap metal in history into the universe's furnace. This mistake was not just in the numbers, it was in the blindness. In the intoxication of power, the Nazi leadership only wanted to hear about divine victories, and the scientists, wanting to keep their funding or their lives, did not dare look directly at the wall of thermodynamics looming before them. But there is a darker, noir hypothesis in the secret files. Did Irene Bread, the true mathematical brain of the project, know about this error? Some of her personal notes after the war suggest she had doubts early on. Could they have intentionally let that error remain? To keep Hitler pouring money into a dream that would never come true, instead of diverting those resources to more practical weapons that could prolong the war? If so, that tiny error on paper was the silent hero that saved millions of lives in Manhattan. The world owes the laws of physics a debt of gratitude. Because while human hatred is infinite, the endurance of metal always has its limits. Step into the lair of iron monsters. In May 1945, the air inside German underground tunnels did not carry the scent of victory, it carried the smell of flight and decay. Can you smell it? It is the pungent odor of burning paper. Crates of files containing decades of rocket engine and aerodynamic research are smoldering in rusted oil drums. Flakes of black ash float in the air, clinging to the faces and lungs of the advancing Allied soldiers. The thud of American military boots on the stone floor echoes, dry and hollow. Each footstep sounds like an announcement of an empire's end. Suddenly, a flashlight beam stops in a dark corner. A German scientist, in a stained white lab coat with sunken eyes from lack of sleep, sits huddled next to a pile of documents he didn't have time to destroy. The interrogation begins right there, in the flickering darkness, with a single flashlight aimed straight at the man's face. There is no shouting, only whispered questions in broken German. Where are the Silverbird documents? A suffocating silence follows. The scientist looks into the darkness, his voice raspy. You are not looking for an airplane. You are looking for the future. In that moment, the line between enemy and ally is blurred by something more powerful than politics, absolute knowledge. Welcome to Operation Paperclip, one of the most controversial chapters of modern history. According to declassified documents from the U.S. National Archives, the Silverbird was one of the top priority targets on the American intelligence blacklist. While the world was busy judging war crimes at Nuremberg, a hunt for intellect was taking place in the background. American agents secretly rounded up more than 1,600 Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians to bring them to the United States. To bypass laws prohibiting war criminals from entering the country, American intelligence officers used a simple but effective technique. They attached a paperclip to the files of these scientists to mark those with high utility value, then bleached their backgrounds and erased traces related to the Nazi Party. A 1946 secret document transfer at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base recorded a shocking event. All 100 pages of Eugen Sänger and Irene Bread's report on the Silbervogel project had been handed over to U.S. Air Force engineers. Declassified minutes show that the Americans were initially shocked by these drawings. They realized that while they were still struggling with propeller planes, the Germans had already calculated skipping on the stratosphere. But the true secret lay in the direct connection. If you look at the technical diagrams of the US X-20 dinosaur project in the 1960s, you will see it is essentially a modernized version of the Silbervogel. And the peak of this legacy is the Space Shuttle program. Internal NASA minutes from the late 70s reveal that the flat-bottom principle for lift during re-entry and the delta wing structure of the Space Shuttle originated directly from calculations made in Sänger's underground bunkers. The Americans fixed the thermal error we discussed by using special heat-resistant ceramic tiles, something Sänger never had. The Silverbird never bombed New York, but it flew into orbit under the name of the one who defeated it. An irony of history, those who once wanted to incinerate Manhattan were the ones who laid the foundation for humanity's greatest achievement in space exploration. However, there is a truth that textbooks often ignore. The clean drawings of the Space Shuttle were built on data obtained from the blood of prisoners in concentration camps like Mittelbau-Dora, where rocket parts were assembled under the most inhumane conditions. The American agents in Operation Paperclip knew this. But in the intoxication of the Cold War, they chose silence. They chose to take the Silverbird and leave the corpses in the bunkers. Technology has no morality, but those who hold it do. The noir mystery of this chapter is, can we truly be proud of setting foot on the moon, knowing the path there was paved with bricks from Hitler's project of total destruction? The legacy of Silbervogel is not just silver spacecraft, it is a permanent moral scar on the sky. Walk slower. The The sound of your solace on the marble floor feels out of place in this silence. At the furthest corner of the exhibition hall, hiding in the shadow of modern jets, is a dull gray steel model of the Silbervogel. Do you see it? It no longer possesses the shimmer of the silver spear in Eugen Sänger's dream. The metal hull has been covered by a thick layer of dust, and tiny rust spots have begun to eat away at the sharp edges of the delta wings. Touch it if you are brave enough. The metal feels cold and coarse under your fingertips. It does not carry the warmth of life, but the chill of a deadly idea frozen in time. The silence here is terrifying. It reminds us of the absolute silence of outer space where this ship once intended to reach to sow destruction. Look into the tiny glass windows of the cockpit. Inside, there is only darkness. There was a time when people believed that from these windows, a pilot would see the deep blue curve of the Earth, not to admire its beauty, but to search for the coordinates of skyscrapers in flames. In outer space, there is no sound. No screams, no explosions. Only an eternal silence where all human hatred becomes small and meaningless. The silver bird lies here, like a forgotten ghost, reminding us that the greatest dreams are sometimes nurtured by the darkest nightmares. Turning the final pages of the Noir Archive on this project, we cannot help but face a brutal moral question. History is not a straight line of progress, it is a tangled web of trade-offs. According to the summary documents of Operation Paperclip, more than 90% of the rocket and aerodynamic technology the US used to win the space race had its origins or direct contributions from Nazi German projects. From Wernher von Braun's rocket propulsion systems to Eugen Sänger's suborbital flight principles. An ironic and painful truth emerges: does humanity owe the first step on the moon to Nazi Germany? Historians still argue fiercely about this. One side argues that science is neutral, and Sänger's discoveries are humanity's heritage, even if born in the shadows. But on the other side, the records of the victims in the bunkers of Peenemünde or Mittelbau-Dora speak a different language. Every screw on NASA's shimmering spacecraft carries the DNA of a dark era. Archive file number 999Z records the late-life monologue of an engineer who participated in both the Silbervogel project and the Apollo program. We looked at the stars, but our feet stood deep in the black mud of crime. We took man to the moon, but we never truly escaped the shadow of the silver bird. The story of the Silbervogel is not just about a failed bomber design. It is a lesson about ambition and limits. We live in a world where the phone in your pocket has thousands of times the computing power of the computers that once sent men to the moon. Technology rooted in projects like this. The truth never disappears, it only hides under the dust of museums or lines of code in archives. It waits for us to be brave enough to dig it up and look it in the face. What do you see when you look up at the night sky? The twinkling stars of hope, or the potential streaks of a 21st century silver bird? Technology has taken us to the edge of space, but morality is what decides what we do once we are there. The greatest mystery remains open: if today, another genius appeared with a great but bloody manuscript, would we choose the light of the stars, or the peace of the ground?